In July 1945, in the midst of World War II, leaders from the US, the United Kingdom, Russia and China gave an ultimatum to Japan that they hoped would end the war. They were demanding Japan's unconditional surrender and warned that any negative response from Japan would be met with prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese Prime Minister, Kantaro Suzuki, was pressured by reporters wanting to know what Japan's response would be. He replied, "Mokusatsu." His intended meaning behind that word was to communicate no comment, that they had not reached a decision yet, and that is the context in which that word is often used. But there is another translation of the word which means to treat with silent contempt, and it was this that the international press, and then in turn the Americans, interpreted his meaning to be. 10 days later, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, killing well over 100,000 civilians. When the process we call communication works effectively, it allows collaboration and community to flourish. But when it breaks down, sometimes the results are devastating. We can describe communication as the process of transferring information from one person to another. This can be done via language in the form of words, it can be done through hand gestures, it can be done through sounds, facial expressions, and through images. A smile, a thumbs up, the phrase "your fly is undone," all pass information from one party to another. But there is a process that functions as a foundation to this one, and its absence was very apparent in 1945. It's the process of creating a mutual database of language, meanings, experience and context that allows all those words, gestures and sounds to convey the correct meaning. Words are, after all, just a combination of sounds, and depending on the culture you were raised in, which is really another word for process, that combination of sounds can mean vastly different things. Language is the result of process, and when those processes vary, languages and meaning varies. There are currently around 7,100 different languages spoken in the world today, and that's not even counting the number of languages that have been lost and forgotten throughout history. And that huge number should be exactly what we'd expect when you consider how isolated and spread out humans were for thousands and thousands of years. The technology wasn't there to allow us to communicate or travel easily, so we had thousands of different isolated processes in operation, creating their own databases of meanings for symbols, sounds, gestures, and expressions. And when we look at our everyday lives, we can see this dynamic at play everywhere. Families, friendship groups, religions, sports teams, hobbies, they are all their own language and meaning creating processes. A basketball coach could say to one of his players, "We need a back screen out of a staggered screen to an open block. If the post isn't open, there's a staggered screen for a weak side shooter," and they will completely understand him. But if he says that to a baker whose main passion is folk music, well, he may as well be speaking in a whole other language. The baker would understand each of the individual words, but there is a process behind their combined meaning that he is not a part of. Communication that works as part of one process can be baffling in another. There is one other factor at work here that is also required for communication to work, and you can see it in each of the examples of groups listed earlier. It's trust. The fundamental belief that the information being communicated is not deception. No matter what is being communicated in any form, if trust is not present, the recipient will either disregard that information or take another meaning from it. Trust has been identified as one of the necessary ingredients for any language to develop, and is why it is theorized that language would have had to have first developed within circles of trust. Communication and trust grow hand in hand, and if one dies, it often doesn't take long for the other to die too. So for the process we call communication to work at its most effective and efficient, we need to have shared a mutual process of developing language. And we need to trust that when that language is used, it is being used honestly. These elements were missing in 1945, but way back in the early history of humanity, once those pieces were in place within individual societies, we really got rolling with expanding how, why, and what we communicated. With trust and shared meaning, we developed language. We developed writing, then paper to write on, then the printing press and books, then telephones and the internet age we now live in, where the divide between our various global processes and cultures has never been potentially smaller. And it's this process, the expanding of the forms and technologies of our communication that we will dive into over the next few episodes, to see how each new step in the process changed how we communicate, and how that changed everything else for humanity.